Well, you notice when we were talking about Socrates, the question I was discussing was historicity. Do we know if there was, in fact, a Socrates? Christopher shifted ground, and he said, look, I don't care if there was or not. I'm concerned about his ideas. He shifted, you may say, from historical evidence to the value of his philosophy. But we weren't discussing the value of Socrates' philosophy. It would be a bit like if we were debating here, and I think you might have had a debate earlier, did Shakespeare write those plays? An historical question. You can say, well, we can enjoy Cymbeline without whether he did or not. That's a separate question. Either he wrote them or he didn't, and that's what history is aimed at investigating. Now, the Bible. Look, I want to argue here that when you look at this stuff, and I know earlier you debated Islam and so on, and it's very common in this situation to have people, usually secular guys, do something that is rather surprising of them, which is they behave exactly like, you might say, the most ignorant fundamentalist. And by that I mean they read the Bible in the most narrow, literal way they can. Now you might say, well, there are some Christians who do that. Yeah, but most of them are uneducated. The atheists who do it are well-educated and should know better. And so, for example, in looking at a passage in Scripture, or even in the Quran, the intelligent question isn't to ask, well, if I read it out loud and read nothing else, what will it say to me 2,000 years later? But rather, how have all the people who have followed with great seriousness this teaching for centuries understood and acted upon that passage? So, for example, I know it's fashionable even among conservatives. The Quran says, slay the infidels. Yeah, but we've had Islam for 1,300 years. We've had numerous Islamic empires, the Umayyad dynasty, the Abbasid dynasty, the Ottomans in Turkey, the Mughal Empire in India, ruling over tens of millions of Hindus and Jews and Christians. Why aren't those people all dead? Because the Muslims didn't interpret that passage that way. No Muslim empire has wantonly killed all the infidels under its control. Why not? Couldn't they read the Quran? They did, but they read it a different way. Now, Jesus, I just want to make one point because this is really not the subject of our debate. But C.S. Lewis, I believe, was once noted that there are just a couple of people in history that when you read about them, if they walked into the room right now, we would all instantly recognize them. He said one such person is Samuel Johnson, that Boswell's account is so vivid that if Samuel Johnson walked in right here, we'd know right away it's Johnson. And I would submit that's also true of Jesus. Jesus is actually not only more real, but in some ways his sayings are more memorable, more powerful than any single character in Shakespeare. Can you name a single character in Shakespeare who utters as powerfully aphoristic, memorable, and influencing statements as Christ? You can't. So here's the point. Either Christ was made up by a bunch of illiterates who apparently were unknown Shakespeares of their own time, creating a character more memorable than Hamlet, or, as Albert Einstein himself said, he said, this man of the gospel so pulsates with life that nobody who really encounters him in an open-minded, unprejudiced way will deny that there was such a man walking around. Now, you may not believe him, but it's not that difficult to believe that he existed.